Good afternoon, and welcome to Keys to Running an Effective IT Shop, a health system CIO Media Inc. production. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. My name is Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor-in-chief of Health System CIO, and I will be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You could send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, first we're going to go about 35-40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Brad Busick, SVP and CIO at MultiCare Health System, William Walders, CIO and SVP of Operations Support at Health First, and Lacey Williams Carlson, VP and CIO at Roper St. Francis Healthcare. And then we will have our Q&A. So this is fascinating to me, this topic. I see it as sort of the core of what CIOs do, but not something we talk about too often. So I'm excited. Brad, let's start with you. Can you give us an overview of your organization and your role?
Yeah, you bet. Good morning. Good to be with everyone. MultiCare is located in the Pacific Northwest, about 20,000 or so employees, about $4.5 billion in revenue. And I oversee the IS&T function, which here includes clinical informatics, tech ed, CI, and part of the cool part about this is that it's emerging, and we're in a very innovative space here in the Pacific Northwest. So we get to deal with all sorts of cool talent and capabilities, whether it's asks for drone delivery or autonomous robots in the hospitals. And there's an appetite here to say yes to that, which is a lot of fun. I've been here going on 3 years and continuing to love the opportunity that's in front of us here at MultiCare as we continue to grow and expand.
Very good, Brad. Thank you. William?
Yeah, good morning. Equally as excited and welcome to be here, Anthony. Appreciate the opportunity. And in particular, the topic, I feel like we talk a lot about transformation and innovation, and the bulk of our jobs, admittedly, 90-ish% is around operations. So glad to talk about that. Chief Information Officer and Senior Vice President of Operations here at Health First. All the IT responsibilities, as well as now all the operations responsibilities, while not germane to this role. I think you see a lot, or this panel rather, you see a lot of CIOs gaining those, supply chain, facilities, clinical engineering, if you don't already have it, et cetera. Health First is in Florida, Central Florida to be specific, on the Space Coast. The spaceport of the world is 6 miles from this office in which I sit. And so it's kind of geographically we're at. We're a $2.5 billion revenue IDN, so payer, about 100,000 members at the moment, health plan, hospital division, which is 4 hospitals that aggregate to about 1,000 beds, and then a medical group that there's a couple thousand providers when you count as our growth across the state. So really interesting place to see all aspects of healthcare, and excited about the discussion.
Very good, William. Thank you. Lacey?
Good afternoon to those of you who are on the East Coast, and I also am delighted to join this panel. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Roper St. Francis, which is a Charleston, South Carolina area health system comprised of 4 hospitals and about 460 employed physicians and advanced practitioners. We have about $1 billion book of business. In that role, I also wear 2 hats. I continue to serve in some capacity for Bon Secours Mercy Health, which is one of the partners in the joint venture that owns Roper St. Francis. And we are currently 10 days away from going live on Epic, moving away from our current very disaggregated, difficult, burdensome, and expensive to support application portfolio to Epic.
Very good. Thank you. All right. Next question, Brad. We're going to start with you. What are the formal mechanisms for deciding what your department will work on, which I believe we call IT governance, and talk about the relationship between business governance and IT governance? Obviously, the business has to decide out of all the things they can do, what they're going to do. And then how do we correlate the IT support that's going to further those business goals? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, a little art and a little science for us here at MultiCare. What we call IT governance oftentimes involves the things that nobody cares about until they break. And so these are the infrastructure plays, increasing storage. As Lacey just mentioned, we're an Epic shop, so every time we do an acquisition or a joint venture, we have to go increase that capacity. Those things just happen, and we carve out resource capacity to accommodate those activities. When we think about business projects, we actually don't necessarily have IT projects. Everything we're doing is driven by the business. And in all of that, we leverage an A3 program here that we call kind of a PDSA, where every 90 days, our team is meeting with our business partners in kind of a group setting. So you have 60 plus of our closest friends in the room, where we're articulating the capabilities we want to go after, and then the associated projects that might come from that. So for example, if someone said, in this case, we need a different solution for, I'm going to make it up, data visualization, that behind the scenes might mean we need to go sunset Tableau and the 15 other ways that we visualize data, and Power BI might actually come forward. So we're not actually solving for a specific product per se, but we're prioritizing by way of timeline, level of effort, risk, those capabilities that are important based on those business needs. Once those are actually identified, we have a next layer of what I'll call granularity, which we call COLT, and it's your clinical operations. So anything that's going to involve patient facing, patient safety technology, whether that's secure chat or a collaboration tool on the floor, that is dealt with by our clinical team. And then in a similar way, we have a business operations team that looks at those projects related to Workday and our financial system, things that the doctors don't care about as long as our systems are up and they're functioning. And oftentimes those two tracks will run parallel. There are times when they combine, as Will said, when those lines get blurred between quote unquote IT and the business, and supply chain has to interact with your EMR. Sometimes then we'll bring Colt and the business team together to have that dialogue. But that's how we do it at MultiCare, and it's been working really well for the last couple of years.
Very good. William?
Yeah, so we've got a focusing event that really uprooted how we govern. So pre-COVID, we had really robust business governance structures and IT governance structures. Business around clinical operations, administration, and strategy, really mature governing councils who met weekly, who sat in rooms and postured and positioned around the queuing of priorities, projects, and et cetera. There was an IT version of that as well that had an intake process with visibility in weeks and months in cases. You would get your item in and spit out in the end in some outcome. We realized during COVID, as we're changing registration systems every other week for a couple months, as we're pivoting towards other capabilities that we needed around digital, that we can make these decisions, not just in the IT level, but at every level of business that day, right? Instead of having to wait weeks. We didn't have the weeks to wait. So we've adopted this new idea post-COVID and during COVID to lean out, intentionally use that word lean out, our decision making. So IT in particular has a digital enablement committee. In our mind, IT is table stakes. We do those things to you, unfortunately, and many times it's transparent, it's irrelevant. We give you the additional resources. We have a penalty, if you will, every time a new project comes in that comes with the overhead that IT costs. We get a good slush fund that funds storage and all the IT components. So the rest that we're really innovating on or deciding on is something to do with digital. So we have a digital enablement committee that's a multidisciplinary team who vets all our digital initiatives. We have 7 at the moment. We have a product owner of each of those initiatives. They work as part of this committee to prioritize things like the patient room of the future, targeting additional automation, all things digital front door. We've got some very myopic focused things on CRM and other things, but that's really the front door now and only door of IT decision making. That feeds what is now just one governing structure in the business, our administrative council, who then takes our recommendations, codifies them into the rest of the organization's priorities. And it's served us well now for the better part of 2 years. And I don't imagine us changing back to that very structured, very lengthy, friction-inducing process of business and IT governance.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely follow up on that in a little bit, because I like the term focusing event. So We'll talk more about that. But Lacey, let me get your thoughts.
I would say that we are fairly similar to what Will described, except that we do have a distinct IT steering committee, but it is comprised of mostly the people in the C-suite who would be at the helm for all business strategy. It just gives us a time to focus specifically on IT implications. So happily, there's zero friction between the overall business strategy and what components of that are sort of fueled by IT. We do have robust discussions because it seems that there's always a bigger appetite than there is capacity on our team. So we have some forcing functions that we use to prioritize and make decisions about if something's essential enough to our overall strategic vision that it's worth investing incremental resources in. And I know you have some questions about that coming, Anthony, so I'll stop there.
All right, very good, very good. All right, next question, William, we're going to start with you. How do you make sure you're not taking on more work than your department can handle, such as overpromising and underdelivering or causing burnout, sort of flogging the horses to try and get to where the overpromising you've done? How do you ensure you have the ability of the appropriate resources to take on the specific work agreed to in the time agreed to? And what I'm thinking of there is where you maybe have only a few people have a very specific skill. So it's easy to overpromise for that skill, meaning you had extra capacity in other places, but you couldn't do that thing. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, let me be very clear. While my approach will sound prescriptive and panaceic, it doesn't always work this way. But so the very first thing I ever do is take an audit-proof accounting of my responsibility. In IT in particular, although my background is blurred, you would see a chart behind me that shows every asset in the IT portfolio, right? People, time, and money. Having a clear understanding of what your capability is, that's audit proof, mind you, really, almost to the penny, almost to the labor hour is the first step. So then when you understand capacity, you can articulate that again in an audit proof manner to your peers at the EVP level who are used to things in that way, right? The CFO with audits and your other peers. When you can speak to them at their level, then they believe you. So what naturally occurs is when you want to do a new project, it comes with this many people, this much time, and this much money, because I can prove that we're maximizing the resources we have. I need the additional resources. Then articulating milestones to that end, we're meeting or not. And this is where I think you get some variation, right? Is you're doing assessments, you're doing estimates on what it's going to cost, skill sets, and there's always surprises, right? Someone wins the lottery or gets a better offer. I think all of us are probably experiencing vacancy rates we've never seen in prior history. And then you just articulate that variation to the plan and you go back and ask for more resources or more time, people, time, and money, those three resources. So that's how I've approached it, taking that audit proof approach, articulating that at every time there's a request, or being transparent if you can take it out of hide with what resources, or you can reprioritize what's lost. That's the best part of our governance structure is we've had, I'll give you payment, for example, was an FY24, having a unified bill and a simple explanation of benefits to our members was a 24 initiative, everybody agreed to it. Suddenly became a 22 initiative and we moved reputation management to 24 and everybody understood what that trade-off meant. We left the room with no one unhappy because they had faith and confidence that what we had, the resources we had available to us were being consumed. And should we have wanted more, I could have done them both. It would have cost us X million dollars and 40 FTEs, but we made the decision in our governance structure to just move and reprioritize.
So step one, the key there is to be able to quantify and articulate exactly the capacity your department has. This is the pie, and here are all the slices that are currently taken, and here's what we have left, and here's what your proposed piece is going to take out of the pie, and here's what it costs.
You nailed it. And what's been powerful for me and my cohort has seen these. That chart behind me, to give it some scale, is 4 feet by 9 feet. It's quite a distance across the room. There's not a single EVP in this company who doesn't have a hard copy of that, who doesn't understand what those costs are, and it makes it personal. You get an understanding of complexity in the resource allocation. I was for a while carrying that around in a quiver and rolling it out at every board meeting that existed. Now they can almost all speak to a chapter and verse, and probably more organized from a business unit and more widely understood across the boardroom table than any other department.
And as just to go a little more, as you said, the size of the pie changes, right? People leave. Okay, so that pie just shrunk now. Someone went out on maternity leave. The pie shrunk for a certain amount of time, but it'll flex back after a certain amount of time. So you almost want to have that in real time changing. And my other question is, can you always buy your way out of a problem? Can you always
No.
purchase more capacity? Because what if you can't get the people?
Yeah, I mean, I'm having and I can't share examples at the moment under NDA and a partner who's publicly traded, but you can't have 9 women and be pregnant for 1 month each and deliver a baby, right? I mean, that analogy holds true in some of these scenarios. So, I have a very similar story now. A lot of these things take time to cook. They have to be done in series as opposed to in parallel. And, you get problematic. I mean, we're at a 12% vacancy rate at the moment. So naively, I'm 12% less productive. And being able to articulate that weekly in every forum, either the high level meeting or my operations meetings, is everybody understands what we're now capable of. And there's no speculation and perception issues around why aren't you delivering, right?
Very good. Lacey?
Will, I was drooling at what you described, and in reality, we have something similar. And I think there's sort of the data-driven conversation that you have in an organization, and then also the political and will conversation that you have. So I don't know about some of your physicians and executives, they're not always fully swayed by some of that data and logic. And I find inevitably that the appetite for things for IT to deliver and accomplish is bigger than the capacity. And so I would say, in addition to the science, which Will explained, I think there's also an art, and that involves compromise and being able to speak the language of business and not necessarily IT capacity per se. I think my team would say she has never not taken on more work than we can handle, right? We somehow figure out how to deliver and make compromises and continually reprioritize.
Yeah. So there's a lot of art to it, Lacey, is what you're saying.
Indeed.
And there's a lot of subtlety. I'm imagining there's times and situations and individuals that, no doesn't really work with. It's not going to go over well. So, right? I don't know if there's any more you want to add there, Lacey, or we'll go to Brad.
No, go ahead and go to Brad.
Okay.
I would like to weigh in on the how do you say no part, though.
Yes, we do have a question about that. Brad, this is very interesting, right? So William's talking about, and I'm sure there's subtleties to what he's doing, but he articulated a very quantifiable approach, which I like. I like his approach. Lacey brought up some great points about some subtleties and nuances that have to be around that and maybe soften it a little bit to be an effective executive. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's the Goldilocks, too hot, too cold, and just right. I would say to your previous question, Anthony, one, I've never met a president or CEO that wants their CIO to be CIO. And so if our board decides that we're going to go acquire a system in Eastern Washington, I don't know that he cares that I've got a data center migration on the docket. Go figure it out. And so I agree with William that while I can't buy my way out of it, what William and I think Lacey both articulated well is frankly the relationship. Like, they actually trust William when he goes and rounds and says, look, this is how we think about our assets, and this is what it costs to go do this work. And so, the word trade-off was mentioned, and we take a very similar approach at MultiCare, particularly around capacity. To Lacey's point, does that mean that everybody believes in the capacity? I think people believe the data that they want that supports their narrative. And so if my boss decides that we can go find another PM to go manage Workday Phase 2 because she wants a certain feature to come forward, I'm going to be on the hunt for a project manager for Workday Phase 2. but with some integrity, I can actually support our capacity with data. And if we don't plan everyone at 110%, I can also surge for the known unknowns. And in my last 3 years here at MultiCare, because of our aggressive growth strategy, it's been really wise to plan for that capacity and leave room for people to be able to surge to go support those emerging opportunities. So we take a very, very similar approach that William mentioned, and everything is tracked for us in our PPM tool. We track that time for capital reasons as well as audit reasons, but it's also helpful for us to know how long does it take for us to go stand up a new site? How long does it take to go roll out Epic at a 200-bed hospital? I want to know that data so that I can get better with our own playbook every time we have to go rinse and repeat.
Very good. All right. Next question. We're going to start with Lacey on this one. Fires happen, but if they happen too often, workers will become frustrated with continually having to drop what they're working on and move to something else. That's my hypothesis there, as it has the effect of making the work feel undervalued. It's just a fact, right? Somebody's really working hard on something. You say, forget that. They say, well, what? Right? So it's deflating. So how do you avoid that, Lacey, as much as possible?
It's interesting. The organization where I am now actually had a history of this happening quite a bit before I joined. And you have to understand this is a symptom. What is it a symptom of, right? In our case, it was a symptom of zero governance and also under investing in infrastructure. So, if you literally don't have connectivity or systems that are whose performance is unsustainable from a clinical perspective, that is always the fire that trumps everything else, right? So the first thing you have to do, I think, is if fires are continually happening, have a good, honest, introspective look across your organization and understand why. In my case, when I joined the organization, the C-suite and the board knew things were going terribly wrong, but I think there was a desire to lay that firmly at the feet of IT, and instead we had an honest conversation about this lack of prioritization and constant pivoting that the C-suite was doing. You, C-suite, own part of the fires that are occurring, and we need to get our own house in order before we can have a high-performing IT team.
Excellent point. A great story. Brad?
Yeah, this is a known unknown for us, and fires for us, we plan for them. I think they only become fires when you don't plan. And again, change, I think, for us has been a constant, and so we know out of the gate that we're going to have technical debt remediation. We're also going to have a really aggressive M&A strategy. So can we plan our work around that so that they're not fires? It doesn't mean that the staff doesn't, go, wow, here we go again. But I'll say that pain is remediated if we have a playbook to operate. Like, I'm cool having problems. I just don't want to see the same problem over and over and over again. So if we can solve for that and shine some light on the areas that become part of the rinse and repeat, I think we get a better outcome and the team feels more prepared to handle the fire.
Very good, William.
Yeah, everything's been said, but not everybody's had a chance to say it. So I'll kind of start with my own unique thing, culture, right? To get an understanding. I don't think you had to COVID, second time I've mentioned it, I'm trying not to mention as much in panels and things, but you didn't have to convince many IT workers to respond to the fire of a once in a century pandemic, right? It's the reason they come to work. It's the mission of healthcare. In Brad's world, they could go work at any of those tech providers that he can look on the horizon and see those tall buildings, logos on them, but they choose to go to the health system because of the mission. So that's on some of the bigger ones around the planning aspect of that. I spent 22 years in the military. I had a pandemic plan and a meteor strike plan and a volcanic eruption plan and an earthquake plan for Florida, right? So plan to Brad's point. And we have hurricane plan that unfortunately we have to use almost every year. So you plan for those things, and more disruptive. And again, with the restating around the governance front, you understand what levers you have to pull and push, turn things off and on, and everybody widely adopts that methodology, and what you're going to lose in the interest of what you're going to gain, it's understood. Kind of back to the original theme of the CI no, or the idea of spreading your staff too thin. There were 7 CIOs in 10 years before I got here. Not speaking disparagingly of them, but they never said no. They said yes. And the expectations were everyone they said yes to would get the thing they said yes about, as opposed, and then wondered why it never came, right? So there is a balance. We always like to say yes, but, and yes, and that's kind of yes, but I need people, time and money. Yes, and competing priorities, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the inevitability. They will occur. I mean, it's going to happen. It's something. It's going to be labor now, inflation, supply chain. Probably in the next 18 months. Who knows, right? More and more of these things are getting piled upon us, and hopefully there's an end in sight where we can get back to the old normal.
So William, and I totally agree with what you're saying. In ways I think about the effectiveness or the quality of a CIO being the way they handle that balance, the way they handle the need to and this is the way I think of it, to protect their team. That's what you're doing when you say no, you're protecting your team, versus managing up and saying yes, right? So those two are at conflict, they're at odds. And the art comes in knowing when, how, to whom to say no, right? Because there are some times when your pie thing goes out the window because of who's asking and what they're asking. Okay, sure, forget my pie. But as often as you can, you have to leverage that pie example in order to justify a no, to protect your team. Does that make sense?
It does. And I guess we often talk about who the CIO reports to and what your peers look like. And I think this is what's essential to prove yourself, as Lacey said, around being that peer at the table with some of these leaders who then understand it. If you're conveying this story second or third hand through a COO, CFO, it's not understood that, hey, hospital division, I understand your piece of the pie is important and it's your number one priority. It's my number 4 behind 2 health plan initiatives and a medical group initiative, right? And they get that because you're at the boardroom and everybody else is surviving these problems. I think you lose the message a little via the medium if you're not at the table, unfortunately. And then I'll also counter that in my 3 years here, I've hired 100 FTEs, which is roughly 106 to be technical, is about a 50% increase in staff. I can assure you there's not a single staff member who still doesn't think that they're overworked and we have more more work than opportunity. But so there's some reality check there too, that data helps deliver to them is, here's how it works. Here's how I understand. I've never said no to additional FTE headcount and still haven't, but I haven't gotten an FTE request in a better part of 4 months, net new. So that would tell me the leaders think they've got enough people, and we're taking on additional work.
Very good. All right. The next question is sort of in line with what we were saying. Sometimes you have to say either no, not now, or not exactly what you wanted. And usually CIOs will say it's going to be a version of those latter two, never a straight no. What's your advice for telling influential users things they don't necessarily want to hear? Brad?
Yeah, so we actually have adopted a yes and approach here, and that sounds silly, but it's very true. Back to the very first question you asked, Anthony. If I've done my job right, I actually don't have to say yes or no, because frankly, it's not my decision. I have a voice at the table and input. My business partners are sitting there on the table arguing with each other, and they can determine if it's a medical group priority, if it's a healthcare system strategy that we're going to go put in first place or second. I'm going to go execute those flawlessly, regardless of the outcome. And do I have an opinion on those? Sure. But to the previous comments, I may not have the talent to go stand up something that they need to go, they want as a number one priority, which means that the timeline for that might shift so that I can go bring that talent to bear to support that initiative. Now, that's at the strategic level. And just last night, I got a note that said, hey, can you go create, an email account before this person starts, because we need to go set their calendar up to give meetings. And that's outside of our policy. By the way, that answer is going to be a hard no. And so the yes and for that behind the scenes will be, why don't we actually wait until this person hits new employee orientation? Because we found that, typically when we do this, people submit 5+ tickets because they're confused on their onboarding and how they, integrate with MultiCare. So let's do everybody a favor and follow the process. So that's how we typically deal with it.
Very good, William.
So there's going to be the privileged few. I think you call them influential users. Yeah. The rainmakers, if you will, that orthopedic surgeon, that spine surgeon who you're going to do everything in your power. I know them by name, as we have 15,000 associates and partners, there's a handful. So excluding them,
yes,
where we bend over backwards, cater to absurd needs because the ROI is there. It's true. You're
it's
going
the
to
fact.
They're going to do the things that, and we'll cater to them to keep their business and avoid them from going to a competitor, et cetera. It's kind of back to what I said is my book of business is widely known by my peers at the table. At any point, I joke, I can run IT with one person. You're not gonna be happy with the outcome. I could tell you what that looks like. And that person could be me or it could be anyone, right? But, or any variation therein. And so, as we have competing resources and forced to say no, and I can't, from a large level project perspective, outside of ERP, and I cringe when I heard Brad say he's in phase 2 of an ERP provider at the moment, and a kind of a long-term vision for EHR. We don't have the Epics and Cerners from an HR perspective. What I did was I said, no but. And I know our financials, I need 60 million in 5 years and 45 FTEs for an ERP, or I need 120 million in 5 years and about 100 FTEs for an EHR. Happy to enter that journey with anyone. I will also not be the CIO when that journey starts. Because the platform and portfolio that I have and understand, I think is the best approach to how we deliver healthcare IT strategically. And there's a version, that's why I'm here. There's a version of the story, and very candid about that we could consider that I don't support. And so, not to hold my ground there, but I just don't think it's the best use of hundreds of millions of dollars, right?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Lacey?
I loved Brad's comment about if you're doing your job right, you're not actually often the person saying no. So I can share a story about that. I actually say no often, and it's a business discussion, not a technical one, and often not even a capacity one. I'm a big believer in early on when you're establishing IT governance or business governance for that matter, in very intentionally creating guiding principles and working hard on them. And they should not be motherhood and apple pie platitudes. They should be, we always value work in this space over this space, so what your North Stars are. So often when I say no, I'm pointing back to our guiding principles. And then the conversation is, we all agreed to why I'm saying no. If that's not the right answer right now, then let's go back to our guiding principles and figure out what they should be and update them. And then the anecdotal story I can share is, as we're implementing Epic, one of the guiding principles around that implementation was that we would do everything in our power to avoid throwaway work unless there was an extraordinary value proposition. And then we said how we would define that. So I found that I was arriving in meetings and people were saying, we have this huge problem right now in Cerner, and here's the consequence, but we can't fix that because, and I was like, no guys, actually we can fix that one. That's not a big lean in. We could do that. So maybe they took it a little bit too much at heart, but I think an effective CIO has to say no and has to understand the art of how to do that.
That's a great point. Very good. All right, next question. William, we're going to start with you. It sounds like a simple question, but I think it's a big deal. How do you, and this will feed into other questions, how do you track work being done? How do you know what's where, what's happening, so you can explain, as we talked about, the key is the pie, telling people about the pie, how the pie's cut up, what if they want a slice, and oh, by the way, here are the things going on right now.
Yeah, so I'm going to steal Brad's answer because we use the exact same tool. I heard him reference it earlier. So we use a portfolio tool that tracks resources, people, time, and money, right? And this is how I could tell you we're also 17% more productive as we all went remote, which is a good story. And in measures that you would normally understood in the IT world around tickets, around queue lengths, around productivity scores, around satisfiers. So we use a tool. We attrite, it's PPM as well. We attrite every resource you can. It's laborious. It was poorly adopted initially until people recognize we make decisions based off of it. If you tell me, and I have a heat map, I look at every MOR around two things: what your hours were in PPM, and I know that if it's more than 2,000 in an annual view, or a 12th of that in a monthly view, or 52nd of that in a weekly view, that we're overburning you, you're overcommitting to a project. And we use these levers and data, again, I guess my theme here is actionable data sets, to then hire more people, and they watch that occur, right? If I properly report and account for my time, and it passes a sniff test, we don't, I always joke, I was in the Navy as a naval officer, you don't lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. We don't hire people who lie, cheat, or steal. They put an honest day's work and an honest answer into these tools, and we act on that. So that's how we track it. As simple as that is, there's some softer sides of this. You're not going to account for everything. It's really telling when our administrative bucket, especially certain times of the year, like now with end of year closeout, with employee reviews, with annual training. I was the first to ever escalate that. I think our administrative burden, 1, is too high, and 2, needs to be spread out over the calendar, right? When you first start documenting some of those things, it's really telling what you could identify and what decisions could be made.
So I think a big takeaway there from what you said is that tools can be great and helpful, but they're only as good as the data that's put into them. So you could have a fantastic tool. If people aren't taking the time on the front end to feed the data into it, it's not going to be very useful. And everyone's going to know that, and then it won't be used.
And it's, again, audit proof. We then charge back lines of business for time given, or lines of accounting for partners and other areas of what our health system does.
Very good, Lacey.
I really can improve on Will's and Brad's answers. I think you just have to have an effective portfolio management tool, track your time, and report out accordingly.
Okay, very good. Brad, anything you want to add there?
Other than what Will mentioned in terms of the example of kind of the annual burdens that administration oftentimes can layer on, the fact that, again, I'll use the title, the CIO was able to come forward and have that dialogue. I guarantee his colleagues were like, thank God. Like, somebody came to the table with data. It wasn't just, William's dashing looks or his opinion, but he basically said, look, I've got data to support the opinion. And by the way, everybody, I don't know what the outcome was, William, but I'm sure your colleagues were like, he's right. And changes were made. That's influence. Like, when you can actually make that change and have it be data driven and not emotional, that's what's exciting. And I think if that can be replicated, it makes for a pretty powerful partnership between IT and the business.
And Brad, I think that's what you mentioned before, the idea of trust, right? You come in as a CIO, you need to establish that trust and credibility. One way you can do that is through data, having data, showing it, and then it's going to be poked and questioned, right? And it's got to stand up, because if you come in with slides and data, and there's a very smart people you're talking to, and they say, oh, slide 15 doesn't match what was on slide 3, boom, you're done.
You're done. Yeah, it's a show me, don't tell me. I mean, I think it's, in the example that was brought up earlier, for places that have had high turnover of CIOs, and frankly, any IT leadership, the data can say that everything's green. If you've got a track record of not executing, it doesn't really matter what the slides say. But if you're executing and you've got trust with your partner, and by the way, the data also supports, hey, I need 2 FTEs, or I'm going to need $3 million for this, that dialogue is very different than it would be in the absence of those artifacts.
Very good. All right, next question. Lacey, we're going to start with you. How do you communicate your department's capacity versus work produced to the relevant users? Are work and value the same thing? And if not, how do you describe the value produced? Mike Restuccia over at Penn, he had a big report that he showed me that we talked about in one of the webinars, that IT produced this big report to give to the business to say, hey, look at all the stuff we've done. It had a lot of data in it, a lot of charts and things like that. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is demonstrating, hey, look at all the stuff we did. So they just don't think it's a black hole where all these resources go in, and maybe from their one point of view, they didn't see a lot come out, but we did a tremendous amount of stuff, and then there's the infrastructure things that people don't think about. So your thoughts, Lacey?
I love that idea of producing an annual report. I'm in the situation right now where when you're doing a big enterprise-wide implementation, and so guys, we're doing Workday and Epic at the same time, so not not for the faint of heart. It's pretty evident what your value proposition is, but I would say that actually work and value are not the same thing. Because perceived value to executives doesn't correlate at all in some areas with work. I think a great example of that is cybersecurity, right? So perceived value is keep me out of the newspapers, keep me up, keep me away from events, especially reportable events, right? And but that is not correlated with expenditures, work, focus, et cetera. So I think you have to be able to tell your story again in business terms and not necessarily I'm spending X hours doing that. The unfortunate reality for us is that there's some things that are just expectations and you will get 0 awards for getting them done right. They can only get you fired.
Very good. Very true and very good. Brad?
Yeah, in a similar way, not only do we produce the annual report that articulates the recap and is a cool way to, I think, highlight some of the celebrations that, again, in the course of a year, so much happens, and more so for my staff than maybe my business partners. I want them to have that spotlight of a capability that we delivered on behalf of the system. Back to those PDSAs, we will clearly, on a 90-day basis, have the owner of that business capability stand up and say, we're on track, we're behind, we need more money. And then the study and adjust is hammered out right on the floor because those stakeholders are standing there. And so that's the time you might say, hey, I'm short, I'm going to make this up, 3 DBAs, I need to go to market. Or, I'm sorry, we're competing with Microsoft for the same Azure resources that you need, and that's going to need to get punted. And so that happens every 90 days. So it's not a mystery to anyone about our capacity, what's in flight, and what is behind.
William?
I'm a math guy. So, value equals quality plus service divided by cost, right? Value is what you're solving for. Cost is known. Quality and service are subjective. So how do you measure that subjectivity? You use tools like we've discussed, what's a widget in IT? How do I measure that? But I'll be very candid, it's entirely based off perception. IT rides a razor's edge of perception and also often doesn't take much to knock you off. So what do you do to prevent that? You you understand the business, you articulate milestones, you deliver to the point the 2 panelists made before me. You celebrate the contributions, I call them, not victories, not what we did well, but the true contributions to the organization. I visualize those in a different way. It's actually a chart, no different than this one, than arcs around lines of business, not in an annual report. And so, just having that advocacy, keeping perception high, addressing it when perception is low, IT is a black hole, whatever, hyperbole that you hear, getting ahead of that, solving that problem and quickly keeps your quality and service score high, thus rendering a higher value score in relation to cost.
All right, very good. Time for my favorite part of the program. So I want to make sure we get this in. Ask a co-panelist. So Brad, I'm going to let you go first. Do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
For both, and we'll start with William. William, the Great Resignation, fact or fiction?
It's definitely fact. And not a resignation. I think people naturally think that I've resigned, I'm going to retire, I'm going to retreat back to my villa. It's people are leaving for more money. And we've leveled the playing field. While you and I have both made remarks around where you're located in the world and having competed in that market, super relevant because you drive by those buildings. Not anymore, right? I could work for Amazon, Microsoft, any of those healthcare companies in Seattle or Silicon Valley from rural Florida. And in fact, I've lost associates to that end. So definitely real. I'm optimistic, but for the wrong reasons. The headwinds of that are being checked by inflation, by retraction of the markets, by layoffs that we're seeing some of our peers do. And a good leader will get ahead of that. If any of you have lost a job or are listening to this either now or in the future, reach out to me. I've got 40 IT vacancies and 20 supply chain vacancies that I'm desperately hiring at the moment. So definitely a fact, Brad.
Lacey?
Yeah, I agree. In some ways, my decision to move to this role is kind of correlated to the Great Resignation. I think a lot of us had a chance to sort of pause about why do we do the work we do and what is important to us. And quite frankly, for some of us, what is important to us might be, if I'm doing this work, I'm going to the most profitable place to do it, especially if I don't have to move any longer. For some of us, as you were saying, Brad, you can compete well against all of the FANG folks in your neck of the woods, and it's because of your mission. So it is not a myth. And if you don't like what you see when you go to look at Will's shop, then please take a look at ours.
Very good, very good. All right, Lacey, do you have a question for one or both of your co-panelists?
Another, is this overhyped or reality? So it seems that every other webinar you hear about in healthcare right now is to pivot to digital. Is that what you hear in your C-suite, and is it overhyped?
I got off the mic first, Brad, so I'll go. I think we've been rebranded. We've been doing digital a very long time. Are you using IT tools and methodologies to drive a strategic focus around consumerism, like the digital giants are doing, providing a better experience? Then absolutely, right? I think we're being looked to be positioning the technology first, which in some ways is good, but in some other ways bad. I think it's important to articulate what that means, define digital, and there's a definition that NIST has if you need one, but that it's irrelevant to your leadership. But define what digital means to your health system, and we've got a clear criteria for that and a roadmap to that end, which I hate. It looks like a NASCAR slide, logos of solutions to provide a reputation and registration and data aggregate, all these things, but it tells a story as to what digital requirements are, and then what solutions could solve it should we opt for a digital one. So I think it's real. It's just translating, like good CIOs do, hype, IT speak, and reality to business.
Brad?
Yeah, similarly, if my business partners want to call it digital transformation, and it's the same work we've been doing for the last 3+ years here, they can call it whatever they'd like to call it to be able to sell it to their group of stakeholders in the clinic or at the hospital. So like the hype, it feels analogous to big data and whatever the latest flavor of that is. But to me, it's the same. It's the same work.
Very good. All right, William, a question for one or both of your co-panelists.
Yeah, I have an independent question for each. We'll start with Brad. So I have I guess the great benefit of not having a merger and acquisition strategy like you do. We take our acquisitions strategically with kind of just indifferent, right? We're not buying hospitals. So how do you deal with having your application portfolio flipped on its head as you acquire a system with your current model?
Yeah, I had a beautiful lock of hair before we started this work. And I think what's been really interesting is it's analogous to the work that I think all of us would do when you come into a system just as a new leader. You do a portfolio application inventory, you look at your skills and your talents, et cetera. It's actually a lot of fun. I mean, if I go look at Walders Inc., the first thing I'm going to do is meet with that staff as part of due diligence. We look at everything that they currently have said yes to. And depending on the type of agreement, whether it's an acquisition or a membership substitution, or if it's just a joint venture, those all have different playbooks. And some of that, I inherit that technical debt. Some of it I'm supporting it, and some of it I'm gutting. And so it all feels a little bit different. The cool part has been to come up with those cost models and those playbooks that account for that work. So if I see Sunquest in the last 8 places, and we know how to do that well, and they don't have Sunquest, we might move them to that. Or if we know that they have something that's compatible, we might just integrate it. And so it's been a really cool opportunity for our team to build it together in the absence of having one of the big 5 firms come in and do it for us. We've used it as an opportunity to sharpen our own tool set internally and do it as a team. So it's been a lot of fun, and we've just got a lot more of that over the next couple of years.
You're a special kind of CIO where that's fun for you. So, so awesome. Lacey, I know the Charleston market well, Carolinas, MUSC in your backyard, others, highly competitive. You guys are competing for market share. You could take any approach to answering this, either from a business or IT perspective, but how do you differentiate yourself from a system, from an IT shop, from who you are when you have a very saturated market of competitors or equivalents?
I guess I'll answer that as a system. We enjoy having the highest market share in the market in which we serve. And I have a long history of being in Catholic healthcare, and we still have an affiliation with Catholic healthcare, but I think it's a lot to do with our mission and why people come to work every day that differentiates us. I actually had my head wrapped around your question to Brad about mergers and acquisitions, because having come from Bon Secours Mercy, and that's why we're here, because we increased our ownership stake in this market. I also loved M&A, and I think you have to have a working hypothesis about what your portfolio will look like, and then you need to pressure test that into every market in which you go. Not to name vendors, but we're currently with the vendor that's the biggest vendor that's not Epic. And if you had asked me coming into this market if I thought we would have pivoted to Epic, I wouldn't have thought so, right? I thought there would be a good reason not to do that. And yet, when you look at economies of consistency across the footprint of Bon Secours Mercy, it ended up making sense otherwise. Whereas when we went into Ireland in Bon Secours Mercy, it totally didn't make sense. That hypothesis fell apart quickly. That has a lot to do with how care is delivered there, and the penetration of EMRs versus plunking our portfolio down. But I'm with Brad. I think M&A is a lot of fun. You got to have a strong playbook, and but also be willing to pressure test your hypothesis going in.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. Floor is yours again.
All right. We have only a couple minutes left. I want to give everyone 30 seconds or less to give an answer to this final question. So I'm thinking IT governance is the most important thing to being an effective CIO, or one of the most important things. What would, you're talking to your colleagues out there and they feel like it's not right, the governance they have is not working. Maybe your top suggestion for what your governance needs to look like. What's maybe either the one indication that your governance is not going to work, that it's screwed up, or the most important thing to have as part of your governance? So let's make that the final question. Lacey?
I think if, and it was either Brad or Will who said this earlier, if you're not saying no, then your governance isn't right. And it may not be you yourself who's saying no, but if you aren't discerning and making hard decisions, then you don't have an effective governance model.
Very good, Brad.
Yeah, I'd say if you pressure test the thinking and you ask your colleagues, where's our portfolio? What's actively being worked? What are our top 5 initiatives? If the answer to those questions are never seen it, I'm not sure, and can you email it to me? You have a very different problem, and so can you partner with someone else in the business to put governance forward? I think CIOs far too often admire those problems, and we hope that someone else is going to put forward governance. Go co-create it. Go do it with your business partners and get a better outcome.
William, last word.
Everything Brad and Lacey said, that's unfortunate. I was going to say transparency, visualization in the process, testing it to see if it's effective, get back to that perception issue. But this all distills down to being brilliant at the basics in regards to all IT operations. If you can't do the fundamentals of basic blocking and tackling at a brilliant level, not a mediocre or average, like brilliant at those basics, you're not going to be in your job long, or you're certainly going to be struggling. So that applies to governance for all the reasons just described. I love that. I always used to, while we hate badge things, I used to put the top 3 things on the back of a badge from an IT perspective, akin to Joint Commission or any of the other audit things that we do. I should be able to talk to any one of the 300 IT associates and say, what are the top 3 priorities? and they should know them, right? And so should most people working the lines of business. So being able to communicate that to lower perception, increase transparency is what I'd say.
Well, fantastic discussion. Regarding continuing education, you could use the final slide in this deck for your CEU needs. You'll get an email when the on-demand recording is ready for viewing. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team and go to our website to register for upcoming events. With that, I want to thank this tremendous panel, tremendous discussion, Brad Busick, William Walders, and Lacey Williams-Carlson. I want to thank our attendees for joining us. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.